third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
This learning objective is just about providing you with some context, kind of the bigger picture for the nervous system. We're going to look at the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system, and we're going to divide the nervous system into things like the somatic, the autonomic, and then the autonomic is going to be divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic. We really, of course, will focus mainly on the brain in a unit like behavioural neuroscience, because the brain is where the action is for us in psychology. But it's good to put the brain into its context. We've already covered the central nervous system, that is, the brain and the spinal cord, and the neurons of these parts of the nervous system. Their role, as we saw, was communication, information processing. But there's also a peripheral nervous system. We've only touched upon the peripheral nervous system to this point. We've covered, for example, the motor cells and the sensory cells. Those two classes of neuron form part of the somatic nervous system. Their cell bodies are not inside the central nervous system. There's also the autonomic nervous system. This nervous system interacts with the organs of our body. And you can divide the autonomic nervous system into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. They have widespread and fairly complex influences on our organs. It's handy to separate them into the sympathetic and parasympathetic functionally. The sympathetic autonomic nervous system is involved in increasing arousal, preparing us for action. It's a neural system. It interacts with our conscious central nervous system, but it operates on our organs, and it basically prepares us for action. The parasympathetic nervous system is the converse. It prepares us for rest, for digestion. So where the sympathetic nervous system shunts blood away from the digestive organs towards the muscles, the parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. It shunts blood away from the muscles to the digestive organs. And they're a very complex, integrative system. Obviously, the focus of this unit is on the central nervous system, particularly the brain. But let's spend a little time on a component of the central nervous system, the spinal cord, that we really only cover outside of this topic in the context of movement. To the left, you can see a diagram of the spinal cord, the belly or the ventral sides facing you. You can see in the cross-section that it's mostly made up of pale fibres, that is, the axons from nerves. These nerves are interconnecting the brain with things like sensory systems, muscles and glands throughout the body. Notice that the inputs to the spinal cord, these go via the dorsal or back part of the spinal cord on and up to the brain. They are fibres or axons that carry information from sensory systems. They're referred to as the dorsal roots. The cell bodies of the neurons involved reside in bulges that you can see there, and they're labelled the dorsal root ganglia. The ventral roots, or the motor pathways, are projections from the belly of the spinal cord, and they run along the belly of the spinal cord, and they go in the opposite direction. They transmit neural impulses from the brain to things like muscles and glands. On the right is shown the most interesting feature of the spinal cord, that some of its neural circuits are self-contained, that is, they don't need inputs from the brain. We call these reflexes. In the example, what is depicted is a neural circuit for the stretch reflex. If some object or force pulls down, for example, on your arm, it causes the muscle in your arm, in this case the bicep, to stretch. This stretch signal is sent to the spinal cord, where a response is almost immediately returned to the relevant muscle, telling it to contract in a reflexive fashion to compensate for the force. So your arm gets pulled down, but immediately bounces back. This does not require your brain's involvement. I'll go over some more examples, including this one, in a little more detail in the seminar.